Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Hey, Colin, what's up? Beautiful Saturday afternoon. Can't think of a better way to spend it than going through our thoughts and analyses on The Legend of Heroes, Trails in the Sky, first chapter, chapter 1, period.
Yes, indeed. As you pointed out before we started talking, this series has some wacky ass naming conventions that, like, if you understand the history of it, makes sense, but to the newcomer does not make sense at all. But before we get started, we want to thank those who have been listening to us. We publicly posted the podcast last Sunday, mostly on the Falcom subreddit, but in a couple of other places as well. And, you know, people have been checking it out. They've been listening. We've gotten some very nice comments. Even better, we got one guy who gave us some good constructive criticism that we're going to be trying our best to react to and to fix. For example, there was some criticism of Kevin's audio. We hope that it sounds better in this episode. Currently, Kevin is in his bathroom. Hopefully that will help with some of the reverb. But, you know, if not, we're going to be looking into Kevin getting a new mic, looking to see what I can do on the post-processing. This it will take a while for us to get everything in place, but we will continue to go farther.
Yeah, and we're not the only ones going farther this week. Joshua, Estelle, and Schera, they left Roland, the city where we spent the prologue, and they went to the city of Bose. But before that, we had a really important scene ending in Roland at the clock tower that's in the center of the city, where Estelle and Joshua, they go up, and Estelle opens up to Joshua why she wants to be a bracer. She tells him this because her mother died in the war that ended about a decade or so before the events that began this game. And this war has impacted so much of the present day 10 years after its conclusion. We see the after effects of this war, and it's given a very personal type element here, where Joshua learns that Estelle's mother died protecting her. Estelle now wants to do that for everyone else. She wants to protect others, like her mom, and that's why she wants to be a bracer. Your thoughts, Colin, on this scene?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts. The first is I think it's an effective scene of revealing some of Estelle's backstory. And I think it's also interesting to see how Joshua responds to it, because like earlier in the prologue, right, he had said things like, I'm broken, I can feel no compassion. Yet this is a place where he clearly does show compassion. From the world building angle as well, this is the first time that you really see some of the more geopolitical situation going on. So you've been talking about this war, but let's be precise about what this war is. The Empire of Erebonia to the north had invaded Liberl 10 years before. I know why, but that's a plot point, so I'm not going to talk about it yet. But Liberl, defended itself. Cassius Bright was one of the people leading the effort to defend Liberl, thus one of the reasons why he's so famous. So what this shows is both the tensions between Erebonia and Liberl, because they had invaded, but also shows the political skill of the queen. This is mentioned by a couple of characters, because Erebonia and Liberl still do have a functioning relationship after all of that. There is trade, as we'll see when we talk about the Agate and Olivier. People are coming across the border. So it's a fraught situation, with scars that have not healed yet, but it's also not a completely hardline liberalians. People from Liberl and people from Erebonia don't necessarily hate each other.
But I want to comment on something where I think you and I have a different opinion.
Sure.
So it's a bit of a gameplay story desegregation. The gameplay and the story are at odds here because we, the player, are meeting these characters for the first time. And so Estelle telling Joshua, here's why my mom died, here's why I want to be a bracer. And to me, that didn't come up in the past 6 years of them together. Didn't come up in their training to be a bracer. Hey, Estelle, why do you want to be a bracer? Also, where's your mom? And I get how, the relationship that deepens, gets closer over time, but this is the first time they had this conversation. It did not make realistic sense.
I hear what you're saying. To me, I mean, first of all, I think we just have to start from the premise that apparently Joshua does not know that, right? That he's learning it. We can say maybe he should have learned it, but the text says he did not. He did not know about it. We can speculate as to different reasons why. He does mention that Estelle does not go up to that clock tower. Clearly, it is a painful memory. Sometimes you don't want to talk about some of these traumatic events that shape you. But even for things that are less serious, you could easily say, hey, Estelle, why do you want to be a bracer? She can say, I want to protect people. Yes, clearly this scene is meant for the player to see this backstory, but I do think that narratively it does cohere because we don't know their relationship before this game. We can suppose things, but we don't know how they really interacted in the 6 years between the intro sequence and now.
This may be a place where we just, one, have to disagree, and two, understand that the gameplay, the player has to come first at the expense of maybe a minor gap in the logical flow of the story, of the interaction between Estelle and Joshua.
I will say one way that JRPGs do this is they'll say things like, well, as you know, and then give a whole bunch of exposition. Like that's clearly for the player. At least in this scene, they're claiming that Joshua doesn't know it. So it's informing another character, and then therefore we learn.
But that's our last scene in Roland. We leave when we enter Bose, where the first chapter takes place, and they have to go there because they want information on the crashed airship, and also Joshua and Estelle, they need the recommendations of Bose and the other guilds in the kingdom to advance on their quest.
It's kind of like gym badges, right, in Pokemon. But we enter into Bose Market, and it's kind of like a mall, right? You have all of these different stalls someplace, and it's important because this is the economic lifeblood of the city. You're going to be talking more about the economics in a second because that's something that really jumped out to you. But what I wanted to talk about briefly was there's a bookseller who sells 2 chapters of a novel about Carnelia. This is a staple of the Trails series, starting with Trails in the Sky, where each game has a set of novels or a set of chapters of a novel that you collect throughout. These are readable. These are fully self-contained narratives that shed light on the world, and in some cases are actually like foreshadowing other games, including this one. I'm not going to go into why. It's going to take you a long time to actually, you might already know why, but I'm not going to mention because people might be following along here. But these novels show how much the overall narrative at least has been signaled before. So that's the narrative purpose of the books. It's also the narrative purpose of the different newspaper issues, the Liberal Chronicle, I think it's called, where after like a major story beat, you get a new issue and you can see how the world of Liberal is reacting both to your actions, but to also other actions around the world of Zemuria, which really goes a long way into making it feel like a living, breathing place. I really like this feature, this inclusion of literature in the gameplay. What I will say is that collecting the chapters for the novel is a pain in the ass because you have to know who to talk to and when. And the only way to really do that is to talk to every single NPC after every single story beat. Because there are some times, including in this chapter, I think we could have gotten chapter 3, but we had to talk to one soldier at a very specific point in time. And the only way you're going to know that is if you're following a guide the whole way. And I don't like playing that way. So the reason why they have the chapters in it like this is because if you collect all 10 of them, you can get a really powerful weapon, like the best weapon in the game. So if you're a completionist, you're rewarded for it. That's good, but you don't need it to beat the game. So I will not be collecting the novels.
So Colin, I want to touch upon what you said about playing with the guide. And to me, that kind of defeats the purpose of an RPG, of a JRPG. It's about exploring into the unknown. Playing with a guide, it's like a straitjacket, and it feels so constricting. It's limiting. I'm going to go so far as to say it's at odds with the mission, with what JRPGs and RPGs are all about.
I mean, I tend to agree with you on a personal level. I just alluded to the fact that I don't like to play with guides. I like having guides available in case I get lost, or I get stuck and they let me know. But that's how I typically use them. Other people are different. Other people love to play with guides, or they love to get everything 100% right the first time. If that's the way that you play, good on you. You'll get these chapters, you'll actually get stuff that we're missing. But it's not how we play.
And it's about personal preference. Games should be fun. You should play games because you enjoy them. And if that's fun for you, then do it.
Yeah.
And what's fun for me is looking at items the developers didn't put much thought into and extrapolating a whole political economic system from that. So we go to Bose, the Bose market, it's a mall. And the one who controls this mall is the mayor. Strike one. We go and meet the mayor. Strike two, she's about 20, 21 years old. Now, for RPGs, JRPGs in particular, with the protagonist are 15, 16, 20, 21, that's, ancient.
She's a woman of the world, man. She's got wisdom now.
Yeah, she's experienced and old. She needs a walker. But then we see that she inherited the position from her father because her father was a business mogul, an oligarch, if you will. And he became mayor and she became Mayor Mabel, because of their economic position of power, because of the business that they controlled in Bose. And the game presents this as something that's neutral or good.
To be fair, we don't know how the mayor is selected in Bose. It could be an election system. There's going to be, in another chapter, we do see a mayor election. I think it's the next one. So it could be an election thing, in which case, like even in America, we've had presidents whose sons have also become president. Is it really so unjust for somebody to take on the same office that their father did just because they're related? If Matbelle was incompetent, that'd be one thing, but she's not presented as incompetent.
She succeeded her father as mayor because of her business ties that her father built that she inherited. So it's an inheritance of political power, the office of mayorship, but one that is dependent on the economic corporate power that is the prime, that is the superior to it. It's one to the other. And the text tells us that Joshua and Estelle are player stand-ins. They like Matbelle. She takes action. She is decisive. She does not let bureaucracy stand in the way. None of that.
I know you're a big fan of bureaucracy, so I can see why you would be critical.
Yeah, but one of the tasks is that she sends Joshua and Estelle over to Gate, the border crossing, where the military is leading the investigation of the crashed airline, searching for the passengers and especially Cassius Bright. So we go there, we go to Gate, we present a pass, and we meet one of the most standout characters in an RPG I've ever seen in all the years I've been playing.
Of course, you're talking about Olivier. Looking ahead at the whole series, Olivier is one of the most important characters in this series. He's in every single game. From the get-go, he's important. We also see that he's a bit eccentric, one might say, right? He likes to fool around with people. He flirts with Joshua a lot to freak out Estelle and Schera. He's always playing a lute. He's walking around strumming on a lute, singing to people. He gives off this persona of having his head in the clouds. But at the same time, we also see throughout the rest of this chapter is that he's very astute at his observations. And he's made of stronger stuff than he seems to be. He's a mysterious character, and we'll get to know him throughout the series and see why that's the case.
One thing that has not aged well is he is a walking stereotype of predatory LGBT people. One of his first interactions is he propositions Joshua, says Estelle is, quote, unsexy tomboy. He's a creep, Colin. He is a major creep. He's in his early to mid-20s, hitting on, in very blatant sexual terms, a 16-year-old.
Yeah, what I found the most shocking about it too was when Estelle was shocked by the possibility that Olivier would like men. And it kind of brings us back to the time that this was published. At the time that this game was published, that's just how we considered things, right? That we considered that homosexuality was out of the norm. We've completely changed in the past 15 years. Like, our culture about that has changed dramatically. It changes in this series as well, as we'll see. But in a way, I kind of like this time capsule to remind us where we came from as a country, as a culture. But it is jarring when you see it.
Estelle, shock and almost horror. Are you one of those men who likes other men? She's read about it, maybe, but never thought it could be a person that could exist and walk about in the world. There's a lot of great things about this chapter, about this game, about this series. This episode, Olivier, not one of them.
No, but it is a part of his character. We have to accept it for what it is in the in the bounds of interpreting this as art, right? Like we can't just criticize his character and walk away.
No, but that's a very good point you made, looking at this as art. So, Colin, a question I have for you. How is the player meant? How does the text want the player to respond to Olivier, to think about Olivier? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the primary thing that people are supposed to react to Olivier as at this stage is to laugh. He's a hilarious character. Like almost every time he gives a speech, you're laughing at him. You're also kind of laughing with him. But through that, maybe you're like, oh, this guy is a bit of a creep. But as you see his character development throughout the chapter, I think you're supposed to like him. Yes, except that he's eccentric, but you're supposed to enjoy his presence.
Yeah, and there are some parts that you get the sense that he's also in on the joke. It's himself. It's also a facade, a persona dialed up to 11 to present an image, to get people to react a certain way.
I mean, and what you notice about the character is that he downplays his own strengths, right? So later on, we go to a prison scene in which he describes that he drank a bunch of wine and therefore got thrown in jail. He comes off as bumbling and incompetent. But from a gameplay perspective, he joins your party. He's just as powerful as Estelle, Joshua, Schera. Later on, he's not supposed to be helping us. He does help us. He helps us throughout the rest of the chapter. Even though he presents himself as this weak wallflower bard type character, he's shooting a gun with precision. He's really useful.
Yeah. And now let's talk about him as a unit in gameplay and combat, because he's the first, quote, mage-ish type character. He's ranged, lots of EP, lots of mana points. Essentially, he can cast arts quickly, different kinds of arts, spells, essentially.
Yes, and he does it I think, in a very specific way. I don't really care so much about his ability to use arts. What I care about are his S-crafts. Not his S-crafts, but his crafts. Because a lot of them have to do with dealing damage to multiple enemies at once. Maybe we'll go on a digression here about the battle system, but we had talked a bit last chapter about the spatiality of the battle system here. Characters have to move around, you have to be in range, out of range, which can impact some stuff. But it's in this chapter that some of our characters start getting AoE abilities, right? Estelle's Hurricane, for instance, where she's circling around, hits everybody in a circle. The whip attack that Schera has, it's very mid-range, or near range rather. Joshua has Flicker, where it's going in a line. And then Olivier has a more circle-based one, where it's a pretty large area, where he can easily get 2-3 enemies at once. So we're starting to see how the spatiality of the battle system is interacting with the abilities that we have, which opens us up to make a lot more interesting decisions.
And it allows for more tactical element beyond go, hit, use a craft. And it really opens up new dimensions of the game. So we meet Olivier, we survive an encounter with him. We go see the general that is in charge of the search for the airline, General Morgan. We learn that he's out searching for the airliner, which, one shows no knowledge whatsoever of military command and hierarchy, what officers do. A general, Colin, should not be out looking for stuff. We should be commanding, coordinating, doing general type things, not acting the part of a private grunt.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from here. I think that in this game, they show General Morgan taking an active hand as a way to show his competence over and against the rest of the military. This comes into play when we get out of the abandoned mine, and Morgan is leading a thing there saying, "My troops didn't notice something here, therefore I came to investigate." I don't necessarily see it as a criticism that he's taking an active hand in an investigation like this. It shows that he cares.
Yeah, he cares. But that's one of the few good things about him that is introduced to the player, because he hates bracers.
He hates bracers.
Hates them. And from his perspective, if we adopt his perspective, of course he would. He should hate them. They're a paramilitary armed force not controlled by the state, going about here and there, crossing borders. They fight monsters, they solve crimes, they do all sorts of things that would normally be in the hands of the state apparatus.
Not only that, but he has a very personal reason, which is the fact that Cassius was part of the military and left it after the war to become a bracer. So there's two factors there. Morgan feels betrayed because he was close to Cassius Bright, and it's showing resource drain from the state. You have this promising tactician that pretty much won the war for Liberal, now leaving the military to join this international organization that, yes, helps, but now they do not control him. And in fact, part of this problem is that Cassius Bright was trying to get to Erebonia to do one of those international missions.
No state in their right mind, no official, legitimate political authority should like the Bracer, should like foreigners sometimes coming in, solving crimes, maybe killing their own citizens.
It's with no judicial oversight.
No. A Bracer messes up. Can you arrest them? Can they arrest Cassius Bright in Erebonia? He's not a citizen, but I mean, decorated military officer. It's the Bracers Guild is a threat to governments everywhere. One thing that is commented about them, Schera says, hey, General Morgan, why aren't you investigating these robberies? Which, Colin, if the U.S. military was doing, taking statements, would you think that's a normal thing or not?
No, it would be very strange. And that's because we have a sharp distinction between the military and the police. But that's not true in every society. I mean, you and me, we are historians of Rome. In the Roman Empire, there was no such thing as police. There was only the army, which is not to say that the army was, investigating crimes, but they did act the role of law enforcement.
But also, if you think about the kind of societies and eras and the types of cultures that are being drawn on for the Trails in the Sky series, where the kind of development, early industrial, they have factories, they have some ranged weaponry and guns. Most of the cultures and states would have a non-military law enforcement apparatus.
But for some reason, we don't here. In fact, I'm trying to think. I think the only place that has a police department is Crossbell, and Crossbell does not have a military.
Now, getting back to the main narrative, we go back from Hacken Gate. We report back to Mabel. So we're told we have to go find Niall and Dorothy, the photographer-reporter team from the prologue.
Yeah.
So we do that, and we're told that someone in Ravenue Village saw something weird, and that an intelligence division led by one Colonel Richard is on the move. Here we have, not just the army doing things, but spies involving themselves in this situation, which, again, would you want the CIA, NSA being involved in, a car crash case?
In a car crash case, no. I mean, but this is not a car crash case, right? This is somebody stealing an airplane and landing it somewhere in which a very highly respected, international icon was on the plane.
It's an airship with hundreds, maybe of people. So I'm being a bit facetious here, and you were right to push back.
I like it when you tell me that I'm right. But our Bracer team, they give a little bit of information to Niall and Dorothy. You scratch my back, we scratch yours. And they decide that they're going to head to Revenue Village to do some investigation. Chances are, as players, we've already been there because we've had side quests taking us there. But this is the first time that the narrative brings us there. On the way, we meet a red-haired bracer named Agate. I'm flagging Agate because he becomes, important later. But in this scene, we see a couple of things. We see he's another senior bracer, right? So we're seeing how bracers act in this world. Special mention is made of the fact that he does not belong to a specific branch. He just wanders around the kingdom. He recognizes Schera and calls her the Silver Streak. Agate is the heavy blade. So we learn Schera is not, she's not just recognized in Roland. She's recognized throughout. She has a profile. But it also introduces us to the concept that in this world, if you're notorious enough for something, you get a title. Playing JRPGs, this is relatively common, but it's a feature of this world that we should pay attention to. Also, you see that Agate learns that Estelle and Joshua are the children of Cassius Bright. And you can kind of see that he has some respect for Cassius Bright, but does not necessarily have respect for Estelle and Joshua. That respect will have to be earned.
Yeah, and I understand it. I sympathize a lot with him. We have two newbies coming about on official business in dangerous areas. They could mess up a very sensitive international investigation that's going on. They could not through malice, but they don't know much. They're inexperienced. They could do a lot of damage of primary and secondary after effects. And I think he's right, without knowing much about them, to be very wary of what this represents. And also, they have a personal stake. They cannot be objective investigators. What if Cass is right? What if he's a terrorist who bombed the airliner? They wouldn't accept that. From the outside, it's a bad situation that Joshua and Estelle are in.
I love how your mind works, because never once in my life have I thought, how could this airliner situation turn out? Cassius Bright bombed the plane. But I mean, you're right. That I understand where you're coming from, that there does seem to be, like, you want things to be well regulated, perhaps a bit more like a Western democracy kind of a deal. Whereas this is a more freer society. And I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment all the time, but there is less regulation. There's more vigilantism. The boundaries that we have don't exist in this world in a lot of ways. Sexual boundaries, age boundaries, personal relationship boundaries, or nepotistic boundaries, as you point out. And so something that we have to, I come back when we were talking about the gay aspect of Olivier's character and the creepiness. Like, we have to accept that this is part of it as an art object, even if it's off-putting to us.
And, I agree that how this is a very deliberate, I think it's a very coherent society culture that is being presented to us. This idea of freedom and no boundaries and no limitations. It's in government. It's in the way the world's constructed. It's how the bracers are. It's how so much is presented to us. And I think it's not accidental by any means.
Sure. But we get to Ravenous Village. We do some talking. And we learn that a little kid saw that something had flown over the village and landed near where the abandoned mine was behind the village. And then so we head over there to check it out. And Kevin, I know you got some strong reactions to this scene. So why don't you let us know what you're thinking?
So annoying. And this is not the only type of thing that is where it's done in this game. Padding. We go to the mine. Kid tells us. We see it's locked. We go back through a couple maps, we get the key, then we go back to the mine again. Completely unnecessary. All it does is to pad the length of the game. And if it was no monster encounters or to get XP, that'd be different. However, the way the grinding and leveling and experience system is in this game, it makes it so much more frustrating. Now, Colin, take it away.
Yeah, so I brought up this point in our discussions about the experience system. I mean, it's incorrect to say you get no experience. What you do get is like 1 experience, 2 experience once you hit a certain level. There are some advantages to this. It means that it means 2 things. A, the player is not pressured to grind or out level the boss because you can't, or if you do, it's going to take you way too long. And the game can design its encounters around the level it already knows you're going to be. It's already going to know what stats you have. That is really important for balancing encounters. So kudos to them for that. Here's the thing. This kind of system has also been done in games like Paper Mario, the first 2, or in Bug Fables, where you fight enemies, you get a certain amount of experience points, and as you gain levels, the amount of experience that you get diminishes. But the time it takes you to kill those enemies don't necessarily fall down, even more in Paper Mario than in here, because here at least your stats are increasing as you level up. The way that the Paper Mario games get around this is that they give you a feature where if you are a certain level above the enemy, you kill them outright and don't have to do the fight. I really wish Trails had something like this, because especially when you're backtracking, it is so annoying, trying to dodge this enemy, that enemy. Oh, now I got hit as a surprise attack. They're going to take a couple of shots at me and then I can run away, because it's not worth it to fight them. It's worth it to fight them if you're looking for a specific kind of Sepith. But that's it. That's really, really it. And it doesn't feel good when, a big part of an RPG series is the battling. And the battle system in this game is great, as we talked about. But you can only enjoy it about half the time, because the other half the time, is not worth your time to engage in the system.
No. And I hope Trails second chapter, third chapter, crossbow. I hope they've made very necessary quality of life improvements, but we'll see.
We'll see. But I want to end this little section. We're talking about the padding is that for next week's special topic, we want to explore a bit more different leveling systems, stat increase systems to put this system that Trails has into context. Maybe imagine what our best leveling system would be. And I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah, we'll get to the heart of a very important topic. Is mass homicide really an effective way of becoming more skilled at all sorts of non-combat abilities? Stay tuned. Okay, so we go into the mine, finally, and we find the Capua family that we saw beforehand with Josette, who stole the gem from the Mirror of Roland's safe.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go a mini boss fight, we beat them up, and we learn that everything from the airship has been moved to a secret location that we now have to go find.
Yeah. Once we leave, we get arrested because General Morgan has shown up. And this is the episode I was alluding to before. He states he realized that his soldiers hadn't checked this place out, so he came to investigate.
Yes, and I think it's very good of him to be like, the civilians interfering in an investigation in an active crime scene. Who knows what they did? They didn't clear it with me, so they could be involved. He has no reason to suspect the best intentions from Joshua, from Estelle, from Schera. At most, they are hopelessly, from his perspective, misguided, irrational, because their father is missing, maybe dead, or they could be in on it.
Counterpoint. These are bracers hired by the mayor of the town. I wouldn't call these civilians because A, bracers are not civilians. Civilians are civilians. And B, they do have official authorization to be there by the highest political local authority. It's a conflict between Mayor Matbelle and General Morgan, which is interesting because they are both close to each other. And Morgan has said before that he listens to requests from Matbelle, which is going to help us in a couple of sentences when we get down to being freed.
Yeah, Morgan says he could not imagine ignoring Matbelle's request, much less one that comes from her acting in her capacity as the mayor. It shows that this personal relationships are so much more important here in this society, in this culture, than the official boundaries of office to office, of the mayor to the general. It's a much more fluid, free, is the word you said, Colin. I think that's a really good descriptor of what this culture of the government, of the military, of even the gameplay is like.
Sure.
Go where you want, do what you want.
But so we get arrested because we can't go where we want and do what we want. And
yes.
And so it's, oh no, what are we going to do? It's dark in here. And then the party hears a voice from the other cell. It's Olivier telling us about all of his great deeds in Bose. He really liked this big Michelin star restaurant. He ate a lot of food, and he was hired to be a musician for them. And then he wanted to collect his wage by drinking wine, and he ran out of wine. So he went down to the cellar and found a bottle that looked really good. And turns out that bottle cost them like millions of fucking money. And he should not have drank it, and he downed the whole bottle.
It was 500,000 Myra. Let's not get hyperbolic.
I need to be precise. I'm sorry. So he comes off as a lush, right? He comes off as a hedonist. You put in here Epicurean, certainly in the modern definition of Epicurean. Like he's a pleasure seeker, and that's landed him in trouble.
But it provides the mechanism to get this party back to get a fourth person. So the mayor comes, frees us. So we're hired, all four of us now, to investigate some robberies in the southern part of Bose. And so we go talk to the witnesses, but we see the limits of military personnel acting as law enforcement. They don't investigate, they don't inquire, they want to assert their authority over the witnesses, over Joshua and Estelle, because they were caught with their pants down.
Yeah, they're very embarrassed, the military is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, and, I'm not saying a police department would be any better, any more efficient. But they're not really trying to solve it. They're trying to solve the damage to their reputation by being visible, by being in force.
I mean, we do see them
And
asking questions. I don't know if it's fair to say that they're not investigating.
it's very poorly done. It's not in a manner where they can go find the culprits with what they're doing.
Sure.
Which is fine.
We are impeded in our investigation by these military guys. And as we're about to give up, we run into the Colonel Richard that Neil and Dorothy had mentioned before. And Colonel Richard is an interesting character, especially in this chapter, right? He stands at a sharp contrast to General Morgan. He's not hostile to the bracers. He's charming. He's affable. He embraces their help. And he ends up, yes, it's a good pun. He ends up benefiting from that relationship, right? Because fast forward a little bit, the military does come at the end of the chapter after we've got the Sky Bandits on the run and we've arrested them. The military is able to take credit for that because Richard says, well, we did this with the cooperation of the bracers. He kind of reveals that he used the bracers in some way in order to get what he wanted. And with these two figures, we see two different types of politics, right? Morgan he's the hardened military man. Liberal should be self-sufficient, power to the state, power to the military. Whereas Richard, who's in the military, right? He's a colonel. He's a realist. He uses all of the tools available to him. That includes the Bracer Guild. And at least in this chapter, Richard has a lot more success than Morgan does.
It's the game telling us that using every tool you have, like you said, is the right way to go about it, being flexible and kind of even getting your hands dirty with non-official ways of going about things. Because Joshua and Estelle, if they really fucked up badly, they could just say, Richard and co., we didn't know. They're not military. They're bracers. We don't have a good relationship. They're not speaking for us.
But then when they do well, they can get in front of the cameras and be like, they did this with our support. We told them to do this. Give us the credit, which is what happens. But we're going a little bit farther there. We learned from our investigation that we can get some clues about where the Sky Bandits had gone by heading down to Valeria Lake, which is the home of a fishing resort. We can talk to a guy there who had seen some shifty stuff going around. And this is a really important scene, or the collection of scenes. We get a lot of character development here. So we in two pairs, right? We have Joshua and Estelle. They develop their relationship a bit more. And Schera and Olivier. Why don't you talk about Joshua and Estelle, and then I'll talk about Schera and Olivier.
Joshua and Estelle. Well, one, Estelle goes fishing. No JRPG would be complete, Colin, without some sort of fishing minigame. And what I can say for this, the best I can say is, thank God it's not long and it's mostly optional.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even call this a fishing minigame. It's a bunch of dialogue boxes. Trails does develop a fishing minigame that is more entertaining, but it's going to take us a couple of games to get there.
Big X on the more entertaining part. Fishing minigames are, by definition, almost always not entertaining.
All right.
Okay, moving on. So Estelle sees Joshua alone on the pier, and they talk about the defining part of Joshua's, personality, the way he interacts or doesn't open up to others. He's closed off. As he said last chapter in the prologue, he's without compassion. He's damaged. He's broken. And they talk about what's bothering them. They talk about their relationship.
And what's important about this, I think, now it's kind of crystallized in my mind, from a literary perspective, putting it in contact with the rest of video games, an insight like this, that Joshua, he deals with things in a somewhat of a superficial level when talking about himself, to not let people in. That's something that you will often see at the end of a game. That's realizing that is the end point. Maybe in the last chapter, you'll see a little bit of development with that. But no, with this game, we're hitting it right out the gate. We got a lot of game left, which means that we can develop Joshua's character arc a whole lot more.
Yeah, it's something that this is the kind of thing you would expect in the climax or the denouement, the resolution of the plot. But here it's very early on. These characters are dynamic and they grow. And one thing that this game does that's so good, this closed, edgy, loner type, this rogue, that's not presented as a good thing. No. The game tells us, Colin, that this is bad. He's is damaged, he's traumatized almost, and that this is not how people should behave.
Correct. I mean, they point out that it's useful because it is useful, right? Joshua's ability of deducing stuff, of having knowledge about certain military things that he shouldn't know about. It's useful.
Yeah.
But it's also pointing to a really unfortunate defect in his character that he has to deal with.
When you see kids who are way mature beyond their years, oftentimes there's a very dark, very bad reason behind that.
Speaking of character defects, let's talk about Schera and Olivier. Yes. I love these characters. And for anybody who has played Cold Steel 4, you will love this scene because you know their arcs. But this is where we really start to see Schera and Olivier form a relationship with each other. And they do it over their shared passion, which is wine. You get a couple of comments from Schera about how it's time to start getting naked and dancing on the table. Which is, for the male gaze, it's always fun to see stuff like that. She's supposed to be a somewhat of a sexualized character, although also very competent. But with Olivier, you also see him like he's complaining the whole time about how he can't keep up, but he does keep up. Like he keeps up a lot better than most people would against Schera. He does ultimately succumb. And we learn, succumb to a hangover. He has to go to bed. And we learn that Schera did that in order to stop him from joining them when they go to pursue the Sky Bandits, right? Because they're going to go and get to their airship that night. That's why they're at Valeria Lake House right now. And she doesn't want to get a civilian involved. Whereas the Bracers are not civilians, Olivier is a civilian. But then we also see Olivier waking up. He claims to have thrown up a bunch and then run out, but he's resilient. He realizes that he's been manipulated and rushes to join.
Another great thing about this, not only how it's showing Olivier as much less self-centered than he claims to be. We see Schera and Olivier, who are young adults, early 20s, but adults nonetheless interacting on relatively equal grounds. So it's less weird with the sexual parts of the characters because they're adults, and it's a healthy expression of who they are, of how they interact, this component of their identity, of their bodies, and so forth. They're both so active, they're giving as good as they get, and so it's a lot less creepy than Olivier propositioning Joshua, who is very uncomfortable, visibly so, with it. But here with Schera and Olivier, they're both into this kind of open discussions and expressions of their sexuality, and it's not presented in this light as something bad. It's just it's who they are.
Yeah.
And within these kind of interactions, I think it's good. When it's Olivier and Joshua, it's so bad.
Fair enough. So we put Olivier to bed for now. And then Estelle, Joshua, and Schera, they spy on Kyle and Josette talking to a mysterious figure. The importance of this scene is to show that there's something going on behind the scenes. These Sky Bandits are not acting on their own. They're being supported by something else. And being this early in the plot, then it's reasonable to assume as the player that that's the real villain, or that's the real object of where the plot's going to go. So they run off to Amberl Tower, which is another one of those towers, kind of like Esmelis Tower that we had been to in the last chapter rather. And their airship is parked right in front of it. Estelle, Joshua, and Schera need to figure out a way to follow them to their base. Olivier shows up. He got over his hangover right quick and gave them the great idea of hitch a ride on the airship. So they sneak onto the airship. Airship goes up, takes them right to their base.
And boy, the dungeon design for this base
is ass.
Has it is nothing to recommend it. We'll do later a sidebar about dungeons and dungeon designs in RPGs.
Yes.
Here it is awful. It's hard to navigate.
Everything looks the same.
Yes. Up and down stairs, no mini-map. You can't tell where you've been unless you memorize the locations. One thing that we want to discuss is, does it go into the realm of tedium and boredom? And to me, that answer is 100% yes. I put on a podcast.
No, yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, look at what is this dungeon asking you to do? You run in a straight line, you check doors to see if there are treasure chests in them. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. So you have to check every one in case you miss something, including a ring for a side quest, by the way. So you definitely want to check everything so you can get your BP later. And then there's a couple of, narrative parts where you listen into a door, then you beat up a bunch of goons and keep going. But there's nothing gripping about playing through this dungeon. There's nothing that you have to think about. There's no puzzles. There's literally just walk until plot happens. And so, I'm the same way. I'll have YouTube up and I'll listen to a podcast, or I'll listen to, just literally anything else that I could pay attention to, because paying attention to that dungeon is not fun. And so the question is it a mark of failure? And I think we have to define what failure is, because real failure means you stop playing, right? Like, it's so bad that you're like, fuck this. I'm not playing this anymore. It's not fun. It's successful enough to make you want to keep going and finish the dungeon.
But I think a really good dungeon does something new, or at least different, or that we haven't seen much. We're in the end of a chapter here. We were like, 20, 25-ish% of the way through the game. It's a milestone in plot, and it should be one for gameplay, but it's not. It's just the same kind of encounters that we've had throughout the game so far.
Yes, I agree with that.
But eventually, like all things, this ends. We get to the end of the dungeon. First phase, not all of it, the first phase. We have a boss battle. Josette, Kyle, and a new character, Dawn, their brother, D-O-N, not D-A-W-N. Yeah, yes. And then it's a pretty standard boss battle.
Yeah.
But what comes before it is really interesting. Dawn is homicidal. He wants to kill the hostages, kill Joshua, Estelle, and Schera. Josette and Kyle, on the other hand, especially Josette, they're not into all this. They have limits. They're bad. Criminals, yeah. Terrorists, maybe. Not wanton murderers. They're doing all this crime because they want to go back to their home.
Right, they have a goal.
They tilled. Yes, the land they tilled as farmers. And JRPGs, to be a farmer, and fantasy novels too, to be a farmer, that's one with the land. That's most of the time a good person doing honest, hard living. And it's a mark in favor of the character of Josette and of Kyle that they want to go back to doing this. They want to return to the land.
Maybe this is because I know things, but I did not get the sense from this scene that they were farmers. They're a noble house that was then kicked out.
Okay, so that's this interesting contrast between your knowledge and mine. And so I assume the land they tilled, that they worked, not, it's literal, it's the land that they own.
Yeah.
Lots of land. Because I wonder if the game wanted to present that impression or not.
No, it could be. Certainly, like, we're seeing here a contrast, not just between homicide and a little bit of morals, but we also see with Don, right? Once Josette says, well, we can just get this money and then we can buy our land back and head back home. He says, why would we do that? We'll just take this money, go fuck off somewhere, live the high life, and then do it all over again.
Yeah, crime is the end. It's the means, it's the end, it's why. Josette, Kyle, crime is an unfortunate thing they have to do to recover their place in society, whether it's as nobles or as farmers, but it's not the be-all, end-all.
So after we hear that, we fight them, and we win. So what happens after we win?
It's a cop-out. It is such a cop-out. I hated it, Colin. Hated it. Dawn was acting on, something was affecting Dawn, some spell or drug or whatever, such that he had no control or even memory over his action, over what he did and why. He wakes up as if from a daze, from a trance, and is like, what's going on? I don't want to kill people. Homicide sounds bad.
Right. He did. I don't think he even knew that he had stolen the airliner. He might have remembered that, but like, he was confused as to what was going on, why they were fighting.
This bad guy who was a clear foil to Josette and Kyle with a family brother, divergent paths of, do we want to fight, do more, do we want to kill people? But no, we beat him. Turns out all of them quasi-good, or at least not evil people at heart. It removes an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I think so. Pay attention to this, I don't want to say mind control, but mind altering stuff, because it is an important part of the game. And I'll be curious to hear if you think it's a cop-out later. But I'm not going to reveal my opinions on that now. As we know, like, you can't actually evaluate a piece of work or a piece of literature until you reach the end, because you can see how everything, lays in place. We're taking this, as we're playing through it slowly. These are our reactions right now. Okay, but as you say, this is only the first part of the dungeon. And the second part is a lot shorter. But after we beat up the Capua family, we have to walk all the way back up, even though we already found an exit if you were exploring, right? But we head up there, and it is interesting narrative-wise. We get stopped a lot by Capua family troops who are fighting us, and they already know that the Capua family lost. They're fighting anyway, because you can tell that these guys, they're fighting for a higher purpose. They're not just fighting for money. They have loyalty to the Capua family. They have loyalty to whatever it is they're trying to do. But gameplay-wise, it's awful because you're constantly being stopped, and you get no experience for it. It's just to waste your time.
Either don't do it, or if we do it, have some sort of mechanism where you get good amount of experience so it feels worth our time, and not, gosh, another battle where we get 2 XP, but maybe have to use up lots of EP. We don't know. There could be a big boss fight coming. There's not, but we don't know that when you're playing it for the first time.
No, precisely.
It's annoying.
Or you're using all of your items, and guess what? Items are expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not like these fights drop money.
So we head back to Bose, and we learn that Cassius had left a letter and a package for Joshua and Estelle.
Yeah.
And that letter is pretty standard. It's,
yeah,
I'm proud of you. Do what you want. What makes you happy? Go on your own path.
It's giving them the blessing to pursue being senior bracers and letting them know I'm alive.
Yes. Because Cassius went off the airship before it crashed.
Yeah. But also included there is a mysterious black object, which is defined by Schera, I believe, as an artifact. And here, an artifact is a technical term. It's a very ancient ornament. As we'll find out later, normally these are taken up by the church. They're controlled by the church because of their power. Obviously, this one isn't, because we have it. We don't know what it does. We don't know how it works. We don't know what it is. But this is where the chapter ends. As okay, we have this now. Our next inciting incident is to take it to somebody who will tell us what it is.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, Colin, about this artifact is how ordinary it is as a generic trope. It's an ancient ornament from the elder days, and because it's ancient, it's stronger, it's better, it's much more powerful than anything they have today, despite the fact that they're doing an industrial revolution,
right,
with guns and trains and airships. But here it's ancient equals better, equals bigger, better.
In modern society, we don't do this. We don't think of ancient Rome as having superior technology to us. The fact that we can talk and record a podcast, that's only possible now. Even just storing audio on an external device for instant playback is mind-blowing to the vast majority of humankind throughout history. There are some places where we do culturally valorize ancient societies, particularly among more conservative people, right? Think of the concept of Roman virtue or medieval piety. In the Renaissance, you have a lot of people saying you have to read the old stuff. The new stuff is crap. You got to read the old stuff. I have some sympathy for this.
Yes, but Colin, we valorize. That's a very good word you said. We romanticize. We don't have this cultural assumption of stuff from the past, technology or weapons is better, can be more effective, more efficient.
Right, because that's just not true. It is very difficult to think that, because it's not true.
In fantasy games, fantasy especially, it's a dime a dozen. It's part of this long decay of the world, this diminishing of magic, of non-human races. Here, it's the magic, the ornament, the artifact. Ancient is better.
Society was way better back then. Then there was a crash, and now we're recovering from it. At least that's the arc in this world.
In many worlds.
In many worlds, yeah. I mean, like, it reminds me of Star Wars, right? Long ago in a galaxy far, far away. Here's all these spaceships and lightsabers and pew, 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 that we will never see in our lifetimes. I thought at this point I'd have a real lightsaber when I was a kid, but I do not. I don't even have a fake one.
But we have this idea of the future. It's going to be bigger and better and more efficient and a more awesome place to live. That is the entire foundation of most science fiction media, novels, games, movies, what say you.
Yeah.
And here it's a really interesting contrast with fantasy, with the Trails series as a representative where it's the past versus the future as the limitless expanse of possibility.
Well said.
Fantasy is the past. Sci-fi is the future.
I said the getting the package was the end of the chapter, and it is. But what we also see is that Schera and Olivier are heading back to Roland. Poor Olivier, his liver might explode once he gets there because he has to deal with Schera and with Ina's drinking habits, and she's even worse. But as you noted, this is kind of unusual. Normally, you collect your 4 party members, and then you continue the game through them, right? I mean, I was just finished playing Tales of the Abyss. It's that way. You collect your 6 party members, and that's it. Like, people don't leave and come back, or if they do, it's for very short periods of time. But no, now we're back to Estelle and Joshua. We're going to go on the next leg of our journey.
And it really emphasizes this story is the story of Estelle and Joshua. Others, they orbit around, but the 2 people who we get to know most and best are these 2 characters. Everyone else, it's how they relate and impact to Estelle and Joshua for party members.
Yeah, I could say that. Well, that's the plot. That's a lot of our analysis. So, Kevin, why don't we jump to your predictions?
So first,
I will confirm or deny nothing. If you're 100% right, I'm not saying anything. If you're so far off, I'm not saying anything either.
Number 1, Joshua is the way he is, closed off, edgy, traumatized because he's a mass murderer. Whether conscious or maybe he's being mind controlled, maybe he was mind controlled like Don was, but he's some sort of serial killer. Maybe he knows it, maybe it's subconscious, but his S-craft is said to be like an assassin's art, sever. So I think he's going to do something beyond the pale, maybe someone he killed. Their family comes and sees him or whatever. He's only 16, but remember, JRPG, doesn't matter. He could be 10 as a killer. I would not bat an eyebrow in surprise. Number 2, who's going to join us next time in Chapter 2? It's going to be someone who's an EP mage type unit because both Joshua and Estelle are frontline fighters. We need someone who can cast lots of orb arts. I think it's going to be Josette.
Okay.
I think she used a lot of ranged attacks in her boss fights. I bet she has high EP, and she was told to be sympathetic, kind of like she's not as bad. She kind of wants to be something different. She and Estelle have a vibe that's going on. They don't like each other, but maybe they can come to like each other. So I bet she comes in the future as a party member. Last, I think Cassius is evil. He's a terrorist or something. Something happened in the war to darken him, and it's a facade he's been putting on ever since. I bet the theme of this game is the loss of innocence. Joshua and Estelle become adults. They're going out into the world. They transition to adulthood. And I think they'll have to confront their past, their father, as some sort of final climatic boss type. But it's going to be this rupture between the childhood innocence and the harsh realities of adulthood.
All right. Well, for those of you who are listening, who have played these games already, you know how far or close he is. As I say, I won't say anything. Let's see how they develop. I'm curious to see how yours changes, because I'm sure you'll be revisiting some of these as you learn more information. I'm curious to see what new ones pop up.
Good to see you, Colin. Good to see our listeners. And I cannot wait to do our sidebar episode next week on leveling and grinding.
I'm looking forward to that. Before we head off, Kevin, why don't you tell them about the Twitter account?
Yeah, so we have a Twitter account. It's at Trails in the Pod, same name for our Reddit account. And we'll be posting new episode releases. We'll be interacting more with the Falcon community at large because we really, both Colin and I, are really into the games and everything about the games. And so this podcast with our Twitter and Reddit and so forth will be like that as well. So at
Well, I hope you follow us. Let us, if you do follow us, let us know what you thought about this episode. Let us know your predictions. If we get some good listener feedback or listener predictions, we can talk about it next week or the week after. But Kevin, I'll see you next week. Looking forward to it. Have a good one.
Same. You too.